the Lord blessed us to be able to build a block building there before the hurricane hit, and our building was one of the only ones left standing in our village, which is precisely why we wanted it there, because they already have no electricity, they have no water, they have to walk 2 miles every day with a 5-gallon bucket just to get water. And so we built the building so they could have a place to have school, so they could have a place for shelter, not just for church, but for community service. And that's exactly what happened during Hurricane Matthew. The whole village went to the church, and the church was standing. Now the church is a shelter for the people who have no home, and it is a distribution point for our aid that goes out. We are taking aid. The reason we sail is because we take aid all the way to the village. The advantage is we don't have to go through the government. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the aid that is going to Haiti through the large donations, through the large charitable organizations are shipped to Haiti on these big barges. Well, right now those barges are sitting in the docks in the south of Haiti in a little town called LEOAFFAIRS. And for the most part, the people are not getting those things. Because those in government who are corrupted and those who are not in government but yoked up with the corrupted government are taking those things off of the boats and then requiring the Haitians to buy them at market. That's why what we do is unique and it's an advantage, because we actually take the stuff down there and we're able to put it into the hands of those who are actually in need. We are a small mission, and our missionary is called Islander Evangelistic Ministries. We cover the entire Caribbean, but because we're so small, we concentrate on one village at a time, and right now our village is in Haiti. And so if you're interested in that, come see us afterwards. We'd be happy to tell you more about that. If you're looking for a place to help, I can guarantee you every single penny donated goes straight to the mission, because we are the mission. But that's not why you're here tonight. That was, as one of my professors used to say, bonus for your educational dollars. I want to tell you a very broad statement. As an attorney, I don't usually like to make those kind of broad statements, but I'm very confident in making this statement. And I think by the time we end this class this evening, you will be confident in making this statement in the future as well. Every single problem that we have in America with government today can be traced to one single problem: the ignorance of the American people on the proper role of government and the proper placement of power in government. Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties, nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, but on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. Chrisanne, how can you make that statement? What about ISIS? What about the refugee dangers? What about illegal immigrants? Every single one of those problems exists because the American people are ignorant on how the government is supposed to work and the proper placement of power in government. And that's what we're going to learn today. Because until we get educated, nothing's going to change. I know there's a lot of jubilation going on through America with this new administration, and I don't mean to deflate anybody's balloon, but Donald Trump cannot fix what's wrong with the government. He cannot. First and foremost, he doesn't have the authority to do everything that needs to be done. The President of the United States has such limited authority via the Constitution. It's amazing that we even spend the time and the money looking at presidential elections. Because the solutions don't lie in Washington, D.C. I mean, think about that. We replaced one person and then sent everybody back to Congress that was there before. Congress has the most power. They're the ones that are supposed to be making all the changes. They're the ones that are supposed to be doing all the limiting. The same Congress that has an 11% approval rating has a 95% re-election. How can we expect anything different to be happening when we keep doing the same thing over and over again? And by the way, the solution to the federal government problem has never existed in the federal government. How many of you think that the designers of our constitutional republic were particularly ingenious? They were highly educated. They knew what they were doing. So in our own admission, these genius, educated, informed people, do we actually believe that they created a federal government whose only check and balance was itself? Well, that's how we behave. This past election, 469 seats up for election in Congress. And all you heard for a solid year was one office and two people. This election, over 30,000 jurisdictions had people up for election on the state and local levels, and all you heard for a solid year, 2 years actually, because our election years are expanding. I about flipped out the other day. I heard people, before we knew that Trump won, I heard people saying, well, we'll just shoot for 2020. Really? How can we be so deceived? How can we be so misguided? Because we lack the proper education. We have failed to teach the right things for so long. We're spinning our wheels. How many of you are frustrated with government? How many of you are frustrated with wondering what to do about government? The only source of our frustration is our universal ignorance. Because the solution to all our problems is the same solution that existed in 1789 when we ratified the Constitution. Nothing has changed except this. Why are we in the situation that we're in? I mean, he has passed out this flyer about how the 18 to 25-year-olds voted in our election, that demographic. Do we really believe that ignorance only exists in that generation? Do you know I practically cannot watch Fox News? My head regularly explodes with their experts. During the presidential election, Monica Crowley called the President of the United States the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. The President is not the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. The President is only the Commander-in-Chief of the military when there is a formal declaration of war. Anybody know the last time we had a formal declaration of war? World War II. Since World War II, the President of the United States has absolutely no constitutional authority and no power whatsoever over the military. None. That power rests in Congress up until the point there is a formal declaration of war. Megyn Kelly jokes, if Donald Trump wins, how is he going to run his businesses while he's running America? No! The President does not run America! All of this discussion that we're having about the Electoral College traces back to the universal ignorance of the people, because we do not realize that the President of the United States is not the representative of the people. You have a representative in the federal government. He sits in the House. Your senator is supposed to be a representative of the state. And the role of the President, as created by the designers of the Constitution, is to be an ambassador on behalf of the states in foreign affairs. That is who the President is. That's why the electors elect the President. Because the electors are supposed to be a representative function of the state as a whole, and they're supposed to reflect the ideology of the state. Therefore, they're supposed to choose a president that matches the ideology of the state, because he's going to be ambassador for that state. Yeah, we have people running around, democracy, democracy, democracy. Why do we tolerate that? The only person I have heard on Fox News, I pick on Fox because they're the ones that are the conservatives, right? They're the ones that are supposed to hold the title on being right. I only heard one person in the last 6 months call America a constitutional republic, and that was Sean Hannity. All the rest of them call it a democracy. How can we not have the problems that we have today, that we're seeing all of these riots and these protests and the demands for the end of the Electoral College, when so many people in America think we're a democracy and not a constitutional republic? Universally. That's the problem. And it begins here, at the local level. So I want you to sort of look at this class tonight. As you're looking at this class, I want you to think about two things. Two questions running through your mind as I am facilitating this class. Because I'll be very clear to you, I am not teaching this class tonight. I don't need to teach this class. James Madison is going to teach this class. Thomas Jefferson is going to teach this class. Alexander Hamilton is going to teach this class. I do not want anyone to walk out that door tonight and say, well, Chris Ann Hall said, because my opinion is irrelevant. I don't teach opinion. I do not teach interpretation. I let the men who designed the Constitution speak for themselves. I don't have to put any words in their mouths. They spoke a lot. 2 questions. If someone had taught this education to me, if someone had been teaching this education for the last 50 years, could we even have the problems in the federal government that we have today? That's your first question. Second question, as we go through this class, is, would you like to have a version of this class taught in Tallahassee to your representatives there? Because I will tell you, don't say yes, wait until you hear the class, okay? Because you might find a problem or two that you don't like. But I guarantee you, from my own personal experience, Tallahassee needs this information. Now, the title of the class today is Protecting. How did you title that, Keith? How did that work? I don't know. Yeah, okay. The last, what was that? The last chance to say the Second Amendment state sovereignty. So let's look at the Second Amendment. Because we don't even teach that properly anymore. Hillary Clinton, during the campaign, was running around doing interviews talking about how she believes that every right enumerated in the Bill of Rights was subject to reasonable regulation. Is that offensive to anybody here? No. 95% of your congressmen believe that to be so as well. So we can't be pointing fingers at Hillary. She's just saying it out loud. The well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free states, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, there are no big words there. It's not even written in King James English. It's just words we use every day. And yet, We can't even get 9 elitely educated, black-robed judges to read and understand simple grammar. See, one of the biggest problems in government is a reading problem. It's selective. They see what they want and then they forget the rest. Every argument put forward by every government attorney and every law professor against your individual right to keep and bear arms is based on the first 4 words, a well-regulated militia. They argue that our framers would not have said a well-regulated militia that meant for everybody to have that, because after all, we know that a well-regulated militia must be a government-managed militia because nobody regulates as well as the government. You laugh. It sounds ridiculous. But I am telling you, this is what's written in legal briefs. They forget. How can you jump over the right of the people? I don't know. I can't get past it. So the problem is we are not asking the right questions, so we're not getting the right answers. And so we're going to very quickly listen to the men who designed the Second Amendment. And we're going to answer the only 2 questions that could even be up for debate in the Second Amendment. Who are the militia and what is a free state? Our first representative of the delegates of the Constitution and of the Bill of Rights comes from George Mason. I need you heard of George Mason. Anybody know George Mason's nickname? George Mason is referred to as the father of the Bill of Rights. And so as the father of the Bill of Rights, shouldn't he have some authority on how the Bill of Rights is supposed to work? Right? Mason, at the ratification debate in 1788, posited this. He said, 40 years ago, when the resolution of enslaving America was formed in Great Britain, the British Parliament was advised by an artful man who was governor of Pennsylvania. Now remember, during the American colonies, the governors were not elected, they were appointed by the king. And this governor of Pennsylvania in the mid-1740s was a very loyal subject of the king. And he advises the Parliament to disarm the people. It is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. But do not do it openly. Weaken them and let them sink gradually. Don't show up on their doorstep to take their gun because they'll shoot you in the forehead. No, you just have to stop importing arms and ammunition. Make it difficult for them to get what they need. And then over time, they will be gradually disarmed, and then you can show up and take their guns, because then they won't have any anymore. And then Mason asks the question that we're asking, who are the militia? He says they consist now of the whole body of the people, except a few public officers. I want you to take note of that juxtaposition of statements there. The whole body of the people, except the government. Now that statement by the father of the Bill of Rights, in and of itself, defeats every single legal argument against the individual's right to keep and bear arms. But then he continues. He says, I cannot say who will be the militia of the future day if that paper on the table gets no alteration. The militia of the future day may not consist of all classes, high and low, and rich and poor. So who are the militia? Who? The whole people, and not? The next person we're going to hear from is Noah Webster. Noah Webster is the guy who wrote the dictionary. And I figured if you're smart enough to write a dictionary, you should have some authority on the meanings of words. Noah Webster says, before a standing army can rule, the people, they must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. The supreme power in America, I want you to listen to these terms. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops that can be raised on any pretext in the United States. Who are the militia? The whole body of the people, and not the government. Not even the government under any circumstances. He says, A force at the command of Congress can execute no laws, but such as the people perceive to be just and constitutional, for the people will possess the power. And jealousy will instantly inspire the people the inclination to resist the execution of the law which appears to them unjust and oppressive. What is a free state? Where there's no standing army. A free state is where the people out-arm the government. And the government cannot enforce unjust, unconstitutional, and oppressive law because the people are educated and they are armed. The next one we're going to hear from is Richard Henry Lee. If you've been through any of my history classes, you know that without Richard Henry Lee, there would be no Declaration of Independence, there would be no sovereignty in the states, and there would be no Bill of Rights, really. Richard Henry Lee is very instrumental. We're going to hear from Richard Henry Lee in just a few minutes. Richard Henry Lee is going to help us understand what well-regulated means, because it eludes the Supreme Court. He says, whereas to preserve liberty is essential that the whole body, you guys catching a pattern here. The whole body of the people always possess arms. Now let's pause here for just a second. If something is essential, can you do without it? No. If you are always doing something, is there ever a moment when you're not doing it? No. Richard Henry Lee is trying to teach us that if you are not patching right now, you are not preserving liberty. He says we are to always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. We do not have a right to keep and bear arms. We have a duty to keep and bear arms in order to preserve liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And you will not preserve liberty for your posterity if you are not training your children up at a young age how to keep and bear arms. Because then, if they are not trained, they are disarmed. And then they can't protect their liberty. Patrick Henry is our last representative in understanding the Second Amendment. I chose Patrick Henry because I like him. And I figure if you're bold enough to stand up in a church, advocate the overthrow of the government, and then punctuate your statement with, give me liberty or give me death, you might know a little bit about liberty. Now this is during the ratification debate, and one of the delegates is trying to explain to the body of delegates that as we're making this list, we can't list everything, so we're going to have to leave some things off the list. And I don't think we should have to put the obvious things on the list. And so he says, the right to keep and bear arms is an obvious thing. We don't need to take up space with this obvious thing, because after everything that we've been through, there is absolutely no way an American future will ever allow themselves to be disarmed. And then he said, by the way, we're not a kingdom. Because you recall, in our history, if we ever wanted to secure our liberty and limited government, it took the sword. We had to form a rebellion. We had to chop off the king's head. This is precisely why we did not create a kingdom. We created a republic. Now that we are a republic, we can actually identify those in government who are dissolving or endangering our liberties. We can call them into the public eye and question them. If they refuse to change their ways, we will assemble the people, remove them from office, and replace them with someone who will do their job. Because that's how a republic works, he said. So that we don't have to put down this one. Patrick Henry didn't like that plan. And in his argument showing how ridiculous this was, the record reflects that Patrick Henry actually turned and sneered at the guy and said, "Oh, sir, we should have fine times indeed if it were only sufficient to punish the tyrant, to assemble the people. Your arms wherewith you could defend yourselves are gone." Have you ever read of a revolution in a nation against those in power? Inflicted by those who had no power at all. And we've just done a quick survey of the Second Amendment. Did we talk about hunting? Did anybody mention skeet shooting? I challenge you, did anyone ever pick up the conversation about self-defense against robbers and rapists? Absolutely not. Because the reason we keep and bear arms is not hunting, not skeet shooting, and not robbers and rapists. The reason that we keep and bear arms is so that we are not enslaved by our government. So that a standing army will not rule over us. So that we can oppose unjust, oppressive, and unconstitutional laws. So that we uphold our duty to preserve liberty. And we can overthrow tyrants. This is what the American people should know. But we can't even tell the difference between a right to do something and permission to do something. The Second Amendment says the permission of the people to keep and bear arms. Does it? No. It says the right. Well, what is a right? A right is a just claim, a legal title, ownership, the legal power of exclusive possession and enjoyment. But what's a permission? The act of permitting or allowing, license, or liberty granted. Do we have a right to keep and bear arms, or do we have a permission to keep and bear arms? Right. It's a little bit cloudy right now, isn't it? Think about that. How does it make any sense that we have to seek permission from the government when and where and how we carry, when the government is the reason that we carry? Samuel Adams said, you have to keep the right to keep and bear arms. Why? Because among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, life; secondly, liberty; third, property, together with the right to protect and defend them in the best means possible. He said these are evident branches of, rather than deductions from, the duty of self-preservation, commonly called the first law of nature. Your right to keep and bear arms is an inherent right based on the first law of nature. Because if you have to ask permission to defend your life, you are not free. You are subject of slave. Yet this is what we are teaching our children. Oh, you're not supposed to do that? See, what did I tell you? Don't put videos.
Done that with your mouse.
Yeah, I'm trying. Oh, we practiced. All right, here's what we'll do. We'll back out for a second. There's more than one way to do cat.
And what we need to do is change the way in.
All right, this is Eric Holder. Everybody know this is Eric Holder? Yeah. This is Eric Holder in 1995. Eric Holder is a U.S. District Attorney appointed by Ronald Reagan. And this is what he said.
Which people think about guns, especially young people. One thing that I think is clear, and what we need to do is change the way in which people think about guns, especially young people. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
Think about that demographic paper now. Think about how many people in this room are keeping and bearing arms at this very moment. Think about how many people that you know in your family who have guns or don't have guns. Because the bottom line is this: even amongst us sitting in this room, we think vastly differently about guns than we're supposed to. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in. How do we fix this though? I mean, what do we do? Well, we don't need to amend the Constitution. We don't need to change anything. We just need to change this. We need to overcome the brainwashing. We need to be stopping the indoctrination of our children into this new age ideology of servitude. And I think we'll all agree by the end of this evening that we'll probably need to tweak a few things about the way we think of that. The solution is building proper foundation. We got to tear down some walls. We got to start over. We got to get back to some ABCs and some 1, 2, 3. And in order to get back to those things, we need to start asking the right questions. Because if we walk around in America thinking that we need to have a common sense debate on gun legislation and that will fix the problems in America, then we need some serious tweaking going on. We've already been brainwashed into thinking differently about guns. The solution to this problem does not rest in Washington, D.C., by the way, because an axiomatic truth is that once government assumes the power, it will never give it up peacefully. Not only that, once government assumes the power, that power will grow exponentially. Let me give you a little example. Because we often think about the liberal progressives as those who believe in big government. So let's just check this for just 1 second. Little question. Who asked the federal government to get involved in our marriages first? The conservatives or the liberals? The conservatives. The federal government has no authority in our marriages. Marriage is not a power that was ever delegated to the federal government. And there is a reason for that. And we're seeing why. But we thought, we have a president that thinks like we do. We have an administration that believes as we do. It will be okay for them to have this power because in their hands they will define marriage the way we want them to. But because we fail to teach history, we do not know that a power of one administration remains to the next. And history dictates that administrations always change. And when administrations change, so do ideologies. So the power to control marriage was okay in this hand, but now it's in this hand. And how's that definition thing working out for us? But look at this. Not only do we now have the federal government defining marriage, but because we invited the federal government in our marriage, they are now defining bathrooms, and wedding cakes, and photography, and who knows what else. Because power granted growth. So when you invite the lion out of the cage, don't be surprised when he bites your head off. The solution to getting this back under control does not rest in the federal government. They're not going to stop. So what's the solution? Right here at home. The solution is the people understanding the proper placement of power between the federal government and the states. Why the constitutional republic was designed as a republic, as a constitutional republic, and not a consolidation of states. The ultimate check and balance on the federal government is not the House or the Senate on the President or the President on the judiciary. The ultimate check and balance rests in the state and local government. Now I'm going to let them teach you. But let me ask you this question. How many of you are tired of people in your state, in local government, who don't do their job? Well, I'm going to share with you my opinion. I believe they don't do their job because they don't know what their job is. Now, this is not a reflection on them, mind you, because they're the employee. We're the employer. If the employee doesn't know what his job is, whose fault is that? The employer. So I have a second opinion. I don't believe the people know what our state and local governments are supposed to be doing. Because we have failed to teach the right things for a very long time. So the state legislators from the state of Virginia in 1799 are going to teach us the job description of your state and local representatives. Now in 1799 we're dealing with an era of government, believe it or not, where the federal government is trying to push outside its limited and defined box already in 1799. And the legislators of the state of Virginia have issued this decree, this assembly, to their people, begging them to help them secure the sovereignty of the state. Because you see, the number one job responsibility of your state and local government is not economic improvement. It is not land management, it's not resource management, it is not the education of your children, it is not regulation of business. The number one job duty of your state and local government is to secure the sovereignty of the state. Look at this. Unwilling to shrink from our representative responsibilities, we would be deceitful in those entrusted with the guardianship of the sovereignty of the state. Your state and local governments are entrusted with that. Because you see, if your state is not sovereign, what is it? It's a colony. And if you live in a colony, you have no land. It's all owned by the king. There are no resources that belong to you. All that goes back to the king. You can't educate your people anyway. And you have to seek permission from the government before you can manage your businesses or create law. So sovereignty is number one, because without sovereignty is nothing. There is nothing. Why is this sovereignty thing the greatest job responsibility? Because they've taken an oath. I do swear I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And if your state and local governments are not securing the sovereignty of the state, they are not keeping their promise. Because you will see tonight, not from me, from those who designed the Constitution, that when the sovereignty of the state does not exist, the Constitution fails. It is null and void. It's not even an operating legal document. What is the greatest threat to the sovereignty of the state? They tell us, federal encroachment. Every dollar your state and local governments take from the federal government, even $1 that they take from the federal government, destroys the sovereignty of the state. Just $1. Why? Because who pays the piper? Who pays the tune? And now all of a sudden, you see people dancing around trying to make the federal government happy so we don't lose our funding. And then all of a sudden you get a whole body of people with the mentality that we cannot survive without federal funding. You know what we're saying when we say what we need them to do? So we need the federal government to come in and do it for them. That's exactly what we're saying. They said, look, these encroachments, the federal government is really good at making them look like you need them. Look, these encroachments may be closed with the pretext of necessity. Right? Because you know we have to have national health care, right? Of course we do. If we do not have national health care, we're all going to die. I got bad news for you. We're all going to die. Father here would be out of a job if death ended tomorrow. Okay? Federal health care does not end death. It only allows the federal government to decide who, when, where, and how to die. Nothing would be disguised by the closed with the pretext of necessity. They say these federal encroachments will be disguised by the arguments of expediency, because you know you have to pass the bill so you can read the bill. Can I remind you, these men wrote this in 1799, not 2016. Why? Because history always repeats and human nature never changes. And those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes, and that's exactly what we're doing, because we have failed to teach the right things for so long. So what do we need to do? We need to get back to some basics. Now this is an interactive course, which means I want you to speak up. So let's practice. All together on the count of 3, we're going to say the word amen. Everybody, that's an easy one, right? Okay? 1, 2, 3. Amen. Okay, so that was the practice. Now let's do it for real. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Amen. Did you hear how loud that was? Every question that I ask, the answer needs to be that loud. Now the reason I make you practice is because these questions are so easy you're going to hesitate. You're going to think they're trick questions. I'm promising you there's no trick questions. Because I want you to see, this is not rocket science. This is not brain surgery. The Constitution was intentionally written to be easily understood. And we just have to get back to the basics. So here's your first question. Which came first? The states or the federal government? States. See? Here's the problem. If we actually believe that, through the laws of primacy, we would know who's in charge. Let's look and see how first they were. Now, we don't teach the truth about the formation of our states and our independence from Great Britain. We teach that our independence came when the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. Both of those statements are false. The Declaration of Independence was not signed on July 4th, 1776. It wasn't signed until sometime in August, or the end of August. And they didn't become independent on July 4th. They became independent on July 2nd. Not with the Declaration of Independence, but with the ratification of the Lee Resolution. The Lee Resolution was a legislative act brought before the Continental Congress. It was debated, voted, and ratified into law. Our states became independent, sovereign states from Great Britain, no longer colonies, on July 2nd, 1776. This was such an incredible day for the founders of our constitutional republic that John Adams would write home to his wife Abigail on July 3rd and say, July 2nd will be an epic day where Americans will celebrate their independence forever. Do you know that it wasn't until the mid-1800s that we started celebrating our independence on July 4th? So knowing that we became independent sovereign states on July 2nd, then we have to admit that the states existed prior to everything. Everything. Prior to the Declaration of Independence by 2 days. Prior to the is there a federal government on July 2nd? No. No, we just threw them off. Is there a federal government on July 4th? No. No. Our first federal government comes through the Articles of Confederation, but it didn't work out so well for us. Now this is where I need to introduce you to a segment of our population that I lovingly refer to as federal supremacists. Because, I'm supposed to love my enemies. These federal supremacists teach that the federal government is superior to the states in all cases. Now these federal supremacists exist in all political theologies, ideologies. They exist in all levels of government. As a matter of fact, some of the greatest horrible things taught about our Constitution come from conservative federal supremacists. For example, I read a book written for our young people by a conservative, somebody you would trust to be conservative outlet for education, who taught that the Articles of Confederation failed because our framers created a federal government that was too small. Now, just think about the implication of that. That implies that because the Articles of Confederation created a government too small, that means that when they created our current Constitution, they must have created a bigger federal government, right? Not true. The Articles of Confederation did not fail because the federal government was too small. The Articles of Confederation didn't work because the federal government lacked significant guidance on how to do what they were supposed to be doing. So not only were they doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, the things that they were supposed to be doing, they were doing them all wrong. For example, the biggest problem with the Articles of Confederation had to do with treaties. The federal government was making inequitable treaties. They were making treaties in which one set of states had to foot the entire bill, and a completely different set of states got all the benefits. Now the states paying were like, whoa, wait a minute. We didn't sign on to this union so we could transfer our wealth to another state. That's not what general welfare means. So guess what? We're not paying. And they had the right to do that because it was not a constitutional treaty. But now we have a problem because a treaty is a contract with a foreign government. And that foreign government doesn't know how it's supposed to work. And so they're ticked off because we've broken the contract. Not only that, the states who are supposed to get all the benefit are mad at the states who won't pay. We were literally on the verge of foreign war and the verge of war between the states, and we've just gotten started. So Congress says this isn't going to work. We're going to have to throw together a new delegation. We've got to elect new delegates. We've got to come together in convention. We've got to create a new constitution. Actually, they started off wanting to amend, but they didn't amend. They created the new constitution, the more perfect union, which is why it's called the more perfect union, by the way, because it's supposed to be more perfect than the Articles of Confederation. Now let me ask you a question. Where's the first time you see the federal government? The Articles of Confederation, right? Should we all say amen again? Amen. So where's the first federal government? Articles of Confederation, right? Okay. So, when we replace the Articles of Confederation, what happens to that federal government? It's gone. Now, how many of you remember in your history classes that there was a very precarious moment in our history when we didn't have enough states to ratify our Constitution? If this Constitution had not been ratified, what would have happened to the Union? It would have been just 13 states. There would have been no Union. If this Constitution had not been ratified, what would have happened to the federal government? We wouldn't have one. We wouldn't have one. So let me ask this question, because these are building blocks now. We've got to catch this. Right here, in this, oh, my laser doesn't work on the LED screen. Right here, in that blank space between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, what are the only form of governments that exist? State and local. The state. This is important when we understand the nature of the Constitution. Now we're going to move on to what is a state. Because one of my favorite things to do is to look up words that we use all the time. Because over time we lose the meaning of words. They get new meanings, or meanings get diluted, or something like that happens. For example, if I tell you I am here to encourage you today, which I am most heartily here to do, you might get a vision of a cheerleader in your head. But go look up that word, encourage, in the dictionary. It means to infuse with courage. Now, my undergraduate degree is in biochemistry. I know when you infuse something, you saturate it to its very cellular level. So when I tell you I am here to encourage you, I do mean that I am here to saturate you to the very cellular level with the courage necessary to defend liberty. A little bit more than a cheerleader, isn't it? Let me show you. A state is a whole lot more than we've been thinking. To know what a state is, we're going to the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, is taken from the first clause of the Lee Resolution. Remember the July 2nd Legislative Act. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in general Congress assembled appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do solemnly do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare. See, we didn't become independent on July 4th. We simply published and declared what we had done 2 days prior. That these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. Now, in this paragraph, we have just learned what a state is not. A state is not a colony. You see, we were colonies, but now we're states. Does that imply there's a difference? Yeah. So what's the difference? The difference is a colony is not free and independent. If you live in a colony, you must seek permission and guidance from the central government before you can manage your land. You must seek permission and guidance from the central government before you can use your resources. before you can regulate your businesses, before you can educate your children, before you can even create some laws, you must seek permission and guidance from the central government, if you're a colony. Anybody feeling like a colony? Yeah. Good news is we're not a colony. We're a state, free and independent. But what does that mean? Continuing now with the rest of our last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, not skipping any words at all, that these independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the what? State of what? Great Britain. See, that word state is not simply synonymous with New Hampshire, Rhode Island, or Virginia. That word state is synonymous with Great Britain, France, and Germany. We created 13 independent, free, sovereign governments. Now let me ask you a question. Is there a central government here in existence on July 4th? No. The federal government? Well, the people have declared these states to be free and independent. And in this paragraph, the people are going to delegate their power to the government. And so if the people delegate their power to the government, what are the only governments that could be receiving this power? Say that again? States. So that as free independent states, they have, look what they have. Full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states like Great Britain, France, and Germany may have right to. And this is the power that Florida holds. Today, nothing has changed except this. Now, your federal supremacist friend will try to explain to you that does not apply to Florida because you are not part of the first 13. Problem is, that is not legally accurate, that is not historically accurate, that is not even politically accurate. There is a doctrine called the equal footing doctrine. It says that every state that enters the Union enters on the same footing as the first 13, and here's your footprint, Florida. Somebody might try to tell you, well, that may be who Florida was when you formed your state. But when you entered into the Union, you surrendered your power. No. Not historically, not politically, not constitutionally, not legally accurate. Because the 10th Amendment doesn't say that the powers were surrendered, does it? It says the powers were what? Delegated. So is delegate and surrender, are they synonymous? No. Are you sure? Yes. All right, give yourselves a hand. You now know more than the Supreme Court of the United States. Because I have read opinions issued by even Justice Scalia, where Scalia himself says the state surrendered power. No, they did not. They delegated power.
In his defense, he did go to law school.
Is that a defense? I think that's a combination. So this is the power. Now I want you to remember this list, because this list is going to pop up again, and this is a built-in block. How does it make any sense that when Florida entered the Union, it lost its sovereignty? Any of you ever heard of a sovereign government by the name of Germany? Okay, some of you haven't heard of Germany. Alright, okay, good. So we're on the same page. Didn't Germany join the European Union? Yes. Alright, so let's fly over to Germany and explain to the German people that they are no longer a sovereign government because they joined the EU. How are the Germans going to take that little piece of news? So why do Floridians? You were created with greater sovereignty than Germany could ever imagine. Florida was created under the principle that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Germany was created under the principle that kings grant rights. Germany has greater sovereignty, and Floridians have greater servitude. I guess maybe we are brainwashing people to think differently about many things today. So let's talk about the Constitution itself. We now know what a state is, so what's the Constitution? Legally speaking, the Constitution is a contract. It is a legally binding contract. It's even better than a contract. Actually, our framers call it a compact, which is more descriptive of what it really is. Because a contract is an agreement between legally sovereign people. When I say legally sovereign, means you've achieved the age of legal consent. Can your 15-year-old legally sign a contract? No, because your 15-year-old is not sovereign in the eyes of the law and still subject to his parents. A compact is not an agreement between legally sovereign people. A compact is an agreement between legally sovereign governments. Now let me ask you something. In a contract, the parties of the contract create the contract. And if the parties of our Constitution are legally sovereign governments, what were the only legally sovereign governments that existed prior to the ratification of the Constitution? That means that the states are the creators of the Constitution. Somebody might try to tell you that the Constitution is an agreement between the people and the federal government. I guarantee you, very sadly guarantee you, that through this whole discussion on the Electoral College, someone is going to try to tell you that the Constitution is an agreement between the people and the federal government. That is not true. And you can prove that false with one simple fact. Was the Constitution ratified by popular vote?
No.
No, it was not. How was the Constitution ratified? By the states. So the people are not the parties to the contract. The states are the parties to the contract. Someone might try to say, well, what we really mean is that the Constitution is an agreement between the state and the federal government. No. That is a temporal impossibility. You cannot be the party of the contract if you are the product of the contract. You cannot sign the contract into legal being if you do not exist until the contract is signed. We've already agreed that the federal government would not exist without the ratification of the Constitution. The states are the parties to the contract. The federal government is the product of the contract. And if we know that the states are the creators of the contract, then we must admit by simple deduction that the states are the creators of the federal government.
Can we get California?
And if we actually knew that, if we actually believed that, there is no way we could have the federal government that we have today. In every sense of natural law, when the creation becomes superior to the creator, it's an abomination. Knowing that the states created the central government, we must know that they enumerated its specific powers. They created a limited central government, and then they did the most important thing they could have ever done. They reserved all other powers to themselves. Now there are two very important words, if you're taking notes, when you hear us, when you see them on the screen, you need to circle them, highlight them, underline them, make them in different colors. Those two words are delegate and reserve. So what power went where? Good news, we don't have to ask the Supreme Court because the father of the Constitution, James Madison, already told us. This is a document that we call Federalist 45, in which James Madison tells us the proper power perspective. He says the powers delegated, remember that important word, delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. We put them in a box. He said those that remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. And now he's going to tell us about those limited and defined powers. Which ones are they? Now this is where you're going to have to recall some of our building blocks that we've already laid. The former, meaning powers delegated to the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects. War, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Where did you see that list before? In the States, right? Full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, do all the right things. Well, Madison says those powers, war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, were delegated to the federal government. If they were delegated to the federal government, where did they have to come from? The state. And oh my goodness, the power of that word delegate. Just a dictionary. It's all you need to end all the problems with the federal government. Look at the word delegate. A temporary trust a lower power. If the states are delegating power to the federal government, that means the states are the higher power. And the federal government is the lower power. And now we know unequivocally who's in charge. Not only that, it is a temporary trust. As long as the lower power is exercising the responsibility or authority in the manner in which the higher power wants them to, they are trusted with that responsibility or authority. The minute they don't do that, the higher power retains the authority to revoke that power from the lower power. Why? Because they're the higher power. Like an employer with an employee. The employee doesn't want to do the job the employer wants him to do, or does it all wrong continually after instructions. Does the employer have to take that? No. You do what?
Get rid of them.
Fire them! And once you fire them, the higher power goes back to the higher authority. Do you see how changing, how altering just knowing this is? Let's look at the power that was reserved to the states. The power is reserved to the several states. Now that word several doesn't mean a few. It means severed, separate. Okay? It's another term for independent. The power reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concerns the lives, liberties, properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Reserved to the state. What about the EPA, the FDA, and the Bureau of Land Management? Well, wouldn't that be the properties of the people? Reserved to the state. What about the Department of Education, HHS, USDA, FDA? Lives of the people? Reserved to the state. How about the FBI, the DHI, the DHS, the FCC, the FCC, the FAA, I'm going to list the ATF, it goes on and on, right? Internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state? Reserved to the state. How is it that something so plainly clear has become so clouded and misunderstood? Because we don't teach the right things anymore. We've lost the attachment to these words. We don't know what reserved means. You know, a liberal. Let me tell you what. George Washington was a liberal. Thomas Jefferson was a liberal. Samuel Adams was a huge liberal. Because in their day, liberal meant somebody who believed that liberty was a gift from God. I like turning my skin when I hear these people say, well, after all, you know, all of our founders were liberals. And they try to apply that to the modern meaning of liberal, but that's not true. How much have we changed the definition of that word over 200 plus years? Let's look at this word reserved. 1830. We're in the same situation again. Federal government creeping outside of its limited and defined box, the states trying to assert their sovereignty. It's called the Great Debate of 1830. John Calhoun is going to help us understand the meaning of this word reserved. The doctrine which denies to the state the right of protecting their reserved power. Now Calhoun is asserting that the states have a right to protect their reserved powers. That's pretty big. To say that government has a right. People usually have rights. Governments have power. Why would the states have a right to protect their reserved power? Well, let's think about this. If there's a chair up here, and on this chair is a sign that says reserved to Chris Ann Hall, what do I have the right to do if someone sits in that chair? Kick them out. Kick them out. If the sign says reserved to Chris Ann Hall, and I don't have the right to kick them out, is the chair really reserved? No. No, because of the definition of the meaning of the word reserved. To exercise dominion over something to the exclusion of all others. Reserved is ownership. That's what dominion is. Colton had that as one of his spelling words the other day. See, dominion, what's that? Is that ownership? Yes. It means you own it. And when we reserve powers to the states, what we told the states are, you are the owners of these powers to the exclusion of the federal government. Wow. Owners to the exclusion. Calhoun is warning us. The states have to have a right to protect their reserved powers, because if they don't have a right to protect their reserved powers, then the powers are not really reserved at all. And then you are only left with one possibility, that it is now the right of the federal government to determine finally and exclusively the limit of its own power. Because if the states cannot protect their own reserved powers, then the federal government can say to you, I'm going to do education today and you just have to like it. I'm going to do the environment and you just have to take it. I'm going to regulate your guns and you've got nothing to say about it. Are the states sovereign?
No.
No. They are reduced to the nature of colonies. And then what is the limit to the federal government? None. None. So let's go back and build on our block. What kind of document is the Constitution? The Compact, which is an agreement between sovereign governments, right? If the states are not sovereign, can they make a legally binding contract? No. So if our states are not sovereign, then the Constitution is not a legally binding document. We do not live in a constitutional republic, but a totalitarian federal kingdom. That is why the sovereignty of the state secured is essential to keeping that oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. So here's the good news. The states are still sovereign. The Constitution is still a legally binding document. The federal government is still limited in its power. And the only thing that has to change is this. You have to understand how it's supposed to work. Jefferson helps us. Jefferson says, whenever a general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Let's sort of break that down in a little analysis. What's your name, sir?
Neil.
Neil. We are going to pretend that I've just stolen Neil's car. Do I have the legal authority to drive Neil's car? No. Do I have the legal authority to sell Neil's car? No. Am I going to get good money for your car now? No. Oh, God, what did I get?
Brand new.
Yeah? What is it?
He's actually a car dealer.
Do I have the legal authority to sell Neil's car? No. If I sell Neil's car, is it a legally binding sale?
No.
No. Why? Because my power over Neil's car is not legally delegated. I do not have ownership of that vehicle, which means any act that I exercise over Neil's car is unauthoritative and void and of no force. What Jefferson is telling us is that when the federal government uses power outside its delegation in the Constitution, it is stealing power from the state. Theft. And that use of that power is void and of no force. Does Neil have to sue me to get his power back? His car back? No. Neil just takes the title to the vehicle to the local officials. They have to return it to him. Why? Because he has ownership of that vehicle. Do the states have to sue the federal government to get their power back?
No.
No, they have to assert the title deed to their power, which is Constitution. Do you know the states suing the federal government to get their power back is not only unnecessary, it is ridiculous and dangerous. It is dangerous because when the states sue the federal government, they must first know that the federal government has the ultimate authority to determine the limit of its own power. It's ridiculous as well, because the state suing the federal government to get their power back is like Neil suing me to get his car back, showing up in court, and finding out that the judge and the jury are all my family members. I mean, think about that. The states are suing the federal government where? In federal court, with judges appointed by? That's a stacked court. Now, our big problem in America is understanding the difference between legal authority and assumed authority. Because somebody will try to explain to you, how are you going to kick the federal government out of this juncture? So many people, they're already exercising this power, so why isn't it now legal? Because they've been doing it for so long. Because it is an assumed authority, not a legal authority. Let's explain it. Neil and his wife are going on a 3-week vacation to the Bahamas. That's exciting, right? On the day they leave, I steal their car. So they have no idea that I've stolen their car. And for 3 weeks, I drive around in Neil's car. Now everybody that sees me driving around in Neil's car assumes that I have the authority to drive Neil's car. Do I have the authority? No. Is my authority legal over Neil's car? No, it is only assumed to be illegal. Neil comes home from vacation, finds out his car is stolen, and demands to have his car returned. Why? Because my authority was never legal. Neil's authority was the legal power. It was just assumed not legal. People have been assuming that the federal government has authority that it does not have, but it does not make that authority a legal authority. And that tells us the remedy. Because we don't have to sue them. They don't have a legal authority. There's not even a challenge of that legal authority. We have to simply step up and take that power back.
Like Kansas did.
Don't even know that. James Madison tells us what our states are supposed to be doing. Madison says, in the case of deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted, the states have the right. Why do they have the right? Because they have the ownership to interpose. Madison says the states must interpose. What does that mean? It literally means to step in between. The states are supposed to step in between the unlawful exercise of power by the federal government to protect the rights and the liberties of the people. But look, Madison says they not only have the right, but they are duty bound. Can we all agree that a duty is greater than a right?
Yeah.
So we know why the states have a right, because the power has been reserved. They have ownership over that power. But where does this duty come from? To the people. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the government. The only reason we ever created the state was to secure our rights. That's why they have a duty to step up and tell the federal government not to exercise that power. Because if the federal government is exercising power they've not been granted, and we allow them to do that, we are establishing that the federal government is completely unlimited in its power. And when the federal government is unlimited in its power, you are a subject in a kingdom, and you are not a free man in a republic. They have a duty because it's the single purpose of their existence. And when our state and local governments refuse to deny federal encroachment, refuse to stand for our state sovereignty, they are failing to accomplish the single purpose for their existence. And then openly and boldly declaring that no, Florida is no longer a state. It is a colony and its people are subject. How do we interpose? What do? We interpose. How do we interpose? Jefferson tells us how we interpose. The several states who formed the Constitution being what? And don't forget the independent part. Because your federal supremacists will try to convince you that Florida cannot stand against the federal government unless Georgia and Alabama agree with you. or 39 other states agree with you. If you have to wait on 39 other states to agree with you, are you independent?
No.
Are you sovereign?
No.
No. He says, have the unquestionable right to judge his infractions that a nullification by those sovereignties, who are the sovereignties? States. A nullification by the state is the rightful remedy. What is nullification? Nullification is Neil saying, you stole my car. I'm taking the keys back. Your power is null and void, and we will not comply. It is just that simple. And I don't even have to show you, they have. The designers of the Constitution are showing us that the rightful remedy to the federal government out of control is refusing to allow assumed authority to become a legal authority. Just stepping up and saying, I'm sorry, your EPA has no jurisdiction here. That's a power reserved to the states. We'll create our own environmental protection agency here on the state level. We don't need federal government. We'll educate our children. We'll have land management. We'll have state reserves. We'll have state forests. We will have state protected land. We don't need the federal government because guess what? We created you, which makes us the higher power and more equipped to do what we need to do than you. We just must simply wake up and stand up and say no more. Now, your federal supremacist friends will very quickly disagree with me. I know, because they do it quite often to my face. And they'll tell you nullification is not allowed because the Supreme Court said so. Oh, they got lots of case law. They'll tell you the Supremacy Clause prohibits nullification. This is my favorite one. Or they'll tell you nullification, the word, is not in the Constitution, therefore the states can't nullify. Let's look at these and see what the designers of the Constitution would say to your federal supremacy. He said, in 1800, remember that period of history, the federal government is leaping out of its box. If the decisions of the judiciary be raised above the authority of the sovereign parties to the Constitution, who are the sovereign parties?
States.
All right. So if the decisions of the judiciary be raised above the authority of the state, dangerous powers not delegated may not only be usurped and executed by other departments, but the judicial department also may exercise or sanction dangerous powers beyond the branch of the Constitution. Consequently, he says, the ultimate right of the parties to the Constitution, who are the states, the ultimate right of the states to judge whether the compact, see, I'm not making stuff up, has been dangerously violated, must extend to violations by one delegated authority as well as by another, by the judiciary as well as by the executive or the legislature. Let's look at that for a second. Madison is just simply reminding us of some things that we already know. The states are the creators of the Constitution. The states created the federal government. And when the states created the federal government, they created how many branches? 3. Which means they created the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Since the states created the judiciary, that must mean the states are the higher power, and the judiciary is the lower power. Because the only power the judiciary can exercise is the power that has been delegated to it by the state. Not only that, something that we have amazingly lost attachment with, the Supreme Court is part of the federal government. I mean, it's not like an epiphany these days. There's no such thing as an independent judiciary. They are parts of the federal government. How does it make any sense that part of the whole can define the power of the whole? If part of the whole can define the power of the whole, then what is the limit of the whole?
Unlimited.
It is completely unlimited in its power. And our friends, who we all admitted were incredibly intelligent, highly educated, were not that stupid. James Madison also, during the debate over the ratification of the Bill of Rights, gives us the greatest protection of our rights. He says the greatest power on earth to protect our rights. Wouldn't it be nice if we taught what the greatest power on earth would be to protect our rights? Anybody here want to know what it is? He says, besides this security, there is a great probability that such a declaration in the federal system would be enforced because the state legislators will jealously and closely watch the operations of this government. Why will the state legislators jealously and closely watch the operations of the federal government?
Keep your power.
To keep their power. They have a duty to protect what is reserved to them. He says, and be able to resist with more effect every assumption of power than any other power on earth can do. Now, can we all remember something about James Madison? James Madison was the subject to a king. Right? George Washington was the subject of the king. They were all subjects to the king before the Declaration of Independence. And 700 years of being subjects teach that if the king's men come after your land and you are a subject in the kingdom, it is you on your front porch with a sword versus the king's men. Who's going to win? The king's men. Well, guess what? We didn't create a kingdom. We created a constitutional republic. And James Madison is reminding us we didn't do this kingdom thing. So if the king's men, albeit the federal government, comes after your land, it is not you on the front porch with your sword. It is you and your county commissioner and your city councilman and your state legislator and your attorney general and your governor and your sheriff leading the way. Saying, guess what? You have no authority here. Your power is null and void. We are the authority. And who wins in that situation? People. The people. The greatest protection that we have has been lost. Not because the Constitution has been altered, not because the Constitution of Florida has been altered, but because we have been fundamentally brainwashed. We have not only been disarmed of our right to keep and bear arms, we have been disarmed of our right to control government. Because we have not taught the right thing for a very long time. Look at what Madison says. And the greatest opponent to a federal government admits the state legislators to be the sure guardians of the people's liberty. Your state and local government are supposed to be the greatest opponents to the federal government, not their best friend co-workers on the same table. As we finish this up quickly, I want to look at the supremacy clause argument because it is really ridiculous. Alexander Hamilton teaches us the meaning of the supremacy clause in Federalist 78, and it's very simple. He says, no legislative act, therefore contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. That's the whole purpose of Article 6, Section 2, the supremacy clause, to show that legislative acts contrary to the Constitution cannot be valid. Let's look at the supremacy clause. This Constitution, comma, and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof shall be the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. There is no qualifier. Nothing else has to happen. However, the laws and the regulations as we write them today are only the supreme law of the land if they are made in pursuance to the Constitution. Is the EPA made in pursuance to the Constitution?
No.
Is the ATS made in pursuance to the Constitution? No. Department of Education? No. Bureau of Land Management? Department of Energy? No. Department of Interior? The very title Department of Interior should be offensive to the sovereignty of the state. Which means they are contrary to the Constitution, which means they are invalid. Alexander Hamilton says they are no law at all. What could possibly be the obligation of the people of the state of Florida to comply with something that has absolutely no legal effect? Only this. Only this one right here. The brainwashing of assumed authority. It's not in the Constitution. I want to tell you that as they bring that one up, you should just be very happy because that's the easiest one. If it's not in the Constitution, well, the 10th Amendment tells us what happens to things that are not in the Constitution. Right? The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited by it to the states are what? So if you search the Constitution all day long and you never find the word nullification, what do you know? Is the power reserved to the states. Which means the federal government can't nullify, but the states can. Let me ask you this question. If the federal government is not defined by the Constitution, then why do we have a Constitution? What is the purpose of the Constitution? If the federal government is not limited by the Constitution in its power, then what is the limit of the federal government's power? None. Except one state. At this point, your federal supremacist is losing his mind if he stayed in the conversation this long. Most of the time they just walk out the door. And he'll look at you and say, you can't possibly mean, Chrisanne, that you are advocating that the states be able to just defy federal law. We would exist in such a lawless state, states breaking laws everywhere. It would be anarchy. Problem is, nullification is not the states breaking the law. Nullification is the states enforcing the supreme law of the land because the federal government has broken the law. Let me show you who else agrees with nullification. You guys know this guy, right? Yep. Robert believes in nullification. This is taken from his majority opinion in the first Affordable Care Act opinion, the one where he said it's a tax, not a penalty. Listen to what he says. We look to the states to defend their prerogatives by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments they do not want to embrace, and when they do not want to embrace the federal policies as their own. Not yielding, that is the very definition of nullification. Can you believe the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States looked at the states and said, if you don't want Obamacare, just nullify. We are looking for you to nullify. And then he says this most powerful statement. The Chief Justice of a currently sitting Supreme Court says, the states are separate and independent sovereigns. And they have to act like it. What do you say, Florida? Isn't it about time we start acting like it? If you want to know how to act like it, go to the 10th Amendment Center. They have sample legislation for you that's already been written. There are over 300 pieces of legislation in current in different statuses throughout the states and local governments. You can nullify on the state level, you can nullify on the county level, you can nullify on the municipal level. We have, is it a county? Collier County? Yes. Collier County has passed the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which nullifies federal law in Collier County. Did you know that? Guess what? Collier County will never live up to it unless you know it and make them do it. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Because Jefferson is warning us. When all government, domestic and foreign, in as little as great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another. One government on another. Which two governments are they talking about? The states over the federal. He says, if the states look with apathy on this silent descent of their government into the gulf which is to swallow all, we will only have to weep over the human character formed uncontrollable but by a rod of iron. When our states refuse to protect their sovereignty, they are declaring that we are not states and that we are colonies. And there's only one remedy in colony. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? What kind of solutions do you want to leave for your children? Life, fortune, and sacred honor is what they gave for us. They sacrificed everything, subject to the king, so that we could be free men in a republic. Do you know the greatest gift our founders gave us? Was the opportunity to self-government. And the greatest condemnation on America today is our refusal to self-govern. Anybody ever read about all the things that happened to our founders because of the stand that they took for us? I teach 2 classes. I teach a class on the forgotten founders. I teach a class on the women, the founding mothers, and it is amazing. I can't teach either of those classes without being emotionally moved because of what they did for us. Do you think we have the right to say that we deserve more comfort than they have? Are we declaring in America today that cell phones and flat-screen TVs and vacations are more important? Don't you think they wanted those kind of things? John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail in just frustration and disgust one day and said, "Posterity, I hope that you will make good use of the liberty that we have provided for you. For if you do not, I will repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it." He said, "You will never know what it costs this present generation to secure your liberty. Do we deserve less sacrifice?" Maybe what we're really saying is, he deserves less liberty. These young people in this room tonight are inheriting something beyond liberty. Despotism. And Donald Trump cannot write this course for us. We must do that ourselves. And nothing of this is ever going to change until we become educated. And we demand and expect that our state and local governments stand up to the federal government and say, "No!" That's ours. You can't have it. So let me ask you this question now. If we've been teaching this for the last 50 years, could we possibly have the federal government that we have today? No. Would you like me to teach a class like this in Tallahassee?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Then you gotta make it happen. You gotta make it happen. How many of you would like your county commissioners to have this class?
Yeah.
Your school board.
What about the schools themselves?
Think about this. If you had a constitutionally minded school board who understands that your school superintendent has the ultimate authority to the curriculum in your district by Florida Constitution, you would not have the state or the federal government jamming curriculum down your throat. How many of you know that the superintendent has the ultimate authority over your curriculum and not the state or the federal government?
School board.
Actually, the school board.
The school board?
School board.
I don't know, in our case, the superintendent might be better than the income.
I don't know, maybe, but that's.
Yeah. If you have a constitutionally minded county commission, if you have a constitutionally minded city council, you have no Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 or whatever they're calling it these days. For me, it's a malignant and pernicious design. Because that's what they called Agenda 21 in 1641. It's been around that long. The malignant and pernicious design. If you had a constitutionally minded sheriff, the federal government would have no authority in your county whatsoever. You can change your life with one office, and it is not the President of the United States. It is your sheriff. How many of you can think of at least 3 people who should have been in the room learning this today? All right. How many of you would like to have been able to have my slides and take notes on everything that I wrote? It's all in this book. Everything that I just taught you is in this book. Not only that, I have a chapter on the constitutional sheriff. I have a chapter that explains to you these arguments of nullification and how they are defeated easily. I have a chapter there on Article 5 conventions. I have a chapter on the sovereignty of the states, the nature of the compact. And not only that, every document and every quote that I cite in this book is given to you in its original source text in the back. If you buy this book, I am giving you all my resources.
School books don't even do that.
Yeah, that's right. I'm giving you all my resources. You know why? All my resources. Because I want you to now be the masters of this information. Because it serves my son for you to know how this is supposed to work. So maybe what I do is self-serving. Because Winston Churchill said, if you will not fight for the right, then you can easily win without bloodshed. If you will not fight when the victory is sure and not too costly, you may have to fight with all the odds against you and only precarious chance of survival. But he said there may even be a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no hope, because it's better to perish than to live as a slave. That's not the legacy I want to leave for my son. So if you want me to come and teach your legislators, your county commission, your city council, how many of you think we should be teaching this in our schools?
Amen.
If you want me to come and teach your schools, your churches, like I'm going to the church tomorrow, all you have to do is contact me on the website. I have no speaking fee. I don't make any groups compensate me for my expenses. We work solely on donations. No, we are not independently wealthy. We are missionaries, for Pete's sake. And in spite of the rumors, we have never received a dime from George Soros or the Koch brothers. But I will openly proclaim to you that if George Soros wants to fund what I'm doing, I will take his money. I will not change my message. And I believe that's biblical. Think about that. The Israelites took all kind of stuff from the Egyptians on their way out. Because what man meant for evil, God can make good. And that's what we work on, solely by faith. And I want to tell you, I am so happy standing here before you today. I had a radio show yesterday. We just podcasted the 803rd radio show. My show is heard globally. As a matter of fact, I have 52 people in Ghana, West Africa that listen to my show every single day. I think that's it. I have a mobile app you can download, you can get my shows, and also we will alert you whenever I'm in the area teaching, so you'll never miss a class. I have articles, I have YouTube videos, I have everything out there to help educate. And all you have to do is contact me, and it won't cost you a dime. But what's it costing our children for us to remain ignorant? Support us in any way you can. Please pray for this trip to Haiti. I'll just be very, very honest with you. I have never sailed before. Okay? And I'm very nervous about this. I have a tendency to be seasick. But I'm loading down with ginger. So I'm feeling pretty confident about that. So pray for us, because anytime you're on the seas, the winds prevail. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. Thank you for everything.
I just want to seriously thank all of you for coming. She's a great educator. You have a second opportunity tomorrow at the Greek Orthodox Church at 3:30. So please.
We'll be doing religious liberty. It's a really fun and challenging class.
And the church, thank you all. Good night.